History and fiction are both replete with stories of people who are convinced utterly that they know best, that they and they alone have figured out just what to do about the world and humanity. Some of these people even find the strength of will to go out into the world, determined to impose their vision on the rest of us by any means necessary. Some act openly, others in secret, and they will employ any method or tool to achieve their ends. The most dangerous of these are the patient ones, the ones willing to spend lifetimes, devote whole generations to the achievement of their goals. What you must remember is that these zealots, however wise or enlightened they may be or claim to be, are just as human and therefore just as fallible as the rest of us, just as incapable of anticipating all possibilities. For as the old saying goes, the best laid plans of mice and men, or in this case, of mice and women, often go astray. Welcome to Brainstorm Lore, and welcome to the Bene Gesserit of Dune. Because I'm once again limiting myself to the first 6 books by Frank Herbert himself, information on the Bene Gesserit's origins is scarce. The best we have are hints that suggest the Bene Gesserit actually predate both the discovery of spice melange and the Butlerian Jihad, as they were already using titles like Reverend Mother and Mother Superior, suggesting that their internal hierarchy was already established. Although the Bene Gesserit are most famous for their use of spice-induced prescience, the vast majority of their abilities are in fact unrelated to the spice, and have more to do with total, almost supernatural control of their physical bodies. A Bene Gesserit can alter blood flow, body temperature, heart rate, and even their metabolism in order to counteract poisons. There is also the weirding way, the martial hand-to-hand combat style of the Sisterhood, not to be confused with that ridiculous sound module from the David Lynch movie. The only other truly esoteric Bene Gesserit abilities, apart from prescience, are their truth-saying abilities, which enables them to tell when a person is lying, and the voice. The voice is what happens when a Bene Gesserit pitches his or her, voice to a specific frequency that allows them to briefly mind control the person they're talking to. The voice is not infallible, however, as other Bene Gesserit are trained to resist it, and mentats are able to resist the voice as well, provided they understand how it works. An ability unique to female Bene Gesserit is the ability to control their own fertility. Regardless of what amount of sexual intercourse a sister engages in, she is able to control whether or not she becomes pregnant and the sex of the child. Although both men and women can learn many Bene Gesserit abilities and techniques, the leadership of the Sisterhood, as its name suggests, is comprised entirely of women. This, of course, leads me to perhaps the 2 most important aspects of the Bene Gesserit with regards to the story of Dune: the breeding program and the Reverend Mothers. The Reverend Mothers are the leaders of the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, and they are rare in number not just because of the elite position they hold, but also because very few actually survive the initiation rite, let's call it that. When a Bene Gesserit is chosen to undertake the initiation, usually after having been deemed sufficiently trained and experienced, an immature sandworm is drowned in water. If you remember my Sandworms and Spice video, then you will know that water is a lethal substance to the sandworms of Arrakis. As it dies, the sandworm releases a poisonous blue bile, named, with rather deliberate irony, the Water of Life. Having been given this deadly poison to consume, the aspiring Reverend Mother must now either use her preternatural control over her own metabolism to neutralize the poison, or die in excruciating agony. Those who actually survived the process not only ascended to high rank within the Sisterhood, but they also gained the ability to unlock the genetic memory of all their female ancestors, granting them great insight and knowledge. The fact that they could only access their female ancestral memory would be somewhat problematic for the Bene Gesserit. You see, ever since the end of the Butlerian Jihad, the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood has set for itself the self-appointed task of guiding humanity towards greater stability and enlightenment. They've been doing this by mostly manipulating society from the shadows, and by doing it far less obviously than the Spacing Guild. But if men are incapable of surviving the water of life, and the few women who can are unable to access half of their genetic memory, how can the Bene Gesserit possibly know which path is the right one to guide humanity down? And so, for 10,000 years between the events of the Butlerian Jihad and the events of the first Dune novel, the Bene Gesserit have labored under the belief that the way to achieve their goals is to bring about their universe's equivalent of a chosen one, the Kwisatz Haderach. Basically, the plan was this. The Bene Gesserit would spend thousands of years working from the shadows, manipulating the various noble houses, arranging marriages, and even having members of their own sisterhood be impregnated by said nobles, mixing and matching various bloodlines in just the right way at just the right time, that would eventually culminate in the birth of a boy who could survive the water of life and essentially become the male equivalent of a Reverend Mother. This male Reverend Mother would, theoretically, be able to access both the male and female halves of his genetic memory. The Bene Gesserit would find some way to put him on the throne, and, with them constantly whispering in his ear, of course, their Kwisatz Haderach, their Messiah, would lead humanity into a new golden age. 10,000 years the Bene Gesserit were working on this scheme, and by the first Dune book, they believed they were within one generation of success. One of their sisters, Lady Jessica, the biological daughter of the vile Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, though neither of them knew that at the time, was to get in bed with Duke Leto Atreides. She would then give birth to a daughter. That daughter would be married to Baron Harkonnen's nephew Feyd-Rautha, and their union would not only heal the breach between these two feuding houses who had been hating each other for thousands of years, but would also result in the birth of the Kwisatz Haderach. The plan was within a hair of completion. And then Jessica had to throw the proverbial monkey wrench into the works by, what else? Falling in love with the Duke, and out of love, giving him the son and heir he'd always wanted. Whoops! What was that again about best laid plans? On the upside, Paul Atreides, the aforementioned son, was in fact the Kwisatz Haderach, so the Bene Gesserit got their chosen one ahead of schedule. The downside is that since Paul had uncovered the Bene Gesserit's manipulation of everything, as well as the fact that they may have had a hand in his family's near destruction along with the Emperor, the Harkonnens, and the Spacing Guild, he was not exactly predisposed to be friendly towards the Sisterhood. Once he became the Emperor and achieved monopoly of the spice, Paul oppressed the Bene Gesserit just as much as he did the rest of the galaxy. Then, as if to add insult to injury, he decided to completely scrap the breeding program. Instead of having children by his official wife, Princess Irulan Carino, which would have at least salvaged the bloodlines the Bene Gesserit had spent thousands of years carefully cultivating, he instead chose to only have children by Chani, the Fremen girl he actually loved, and which the Bene Gesserit saw as little more than a barbarian. Unsurprisingly, the Bene Gesserit resented this loss of their power, which is why they joined in the conspiracy to eliminate Paul in Dune Messiah. But if the Sisterhood thought Paul was bad, then they were woefully unprepared for his son. Leto II proved to be even more tyrannical and tight-fisted with the spice than dear old Dad, effectively ending space travel and confining people to their own planets for over 3,000 years. After Leto's death at the end of God Emperor of Dune, an event known as the Scattering occurred, where humanity, finally freed from the tyrant's oppression, spread far and wide across the galaxy, the Bene Gesserit among them. By the fifth book, Heretics of Dune, over 1,000 years have passed since Leto's death. By this time, an isolated splinter group of the Bene Gesserit had changed, adopting a more aggressive and domineering ideology, and calling themselves the Honored Matres. This sisterhood sought to rule the galaxy with an iron fist, and would inevitably go to war with the Bene Gesserit over the territory of the Old Imperium. I was going to talk about the Honored Matres in this video, when it suddenly occurred to me that in many ways they are much more relevant to the subjects of the next video in this series. But before I conclude this video, we'll go over one final aspect of the Bene Gesserit, the idea of preborn humans. Remember how I said earlier that becoming a Reverend Mother enables a Bene Gesserit to unlock at least half of her genetic memory? Turns out the Bene Gesserit sisterhood is utterly terrified of the idea of children being born already having access to the so-called other memory. These so-called preborn children are treated like, and in fact called, abominations by the sisterhood. Their fear is that such a child, born with all this knowledge and information before they were able to form their own personalities, would eventually succumb to the pressure of so many ancestral memories and go mad. This fate is often likened to a kind of demon possession. Which brings us to the rather tragic case of Saint Alia of the Knife, the sister of Paul Atreides. See, when the Atreides were betrayed and nearly destroyed by their enemies the Harkonnens, the only survivors of that attack were Paul and his mother Jessica, who was pregnant at the time, though no one but she knew it then. After being adopted by a tribe of Fremen, Jessica decided to undergo the process of becoming a Reverend Mother and drank the water of life. She survived the ordeal, but the fact that she was pregnant at the time resulted in her daughter Alia being preborn. For an example, she was already able to walk and speak in complete sentences within weeks of being born, which freaked out the Fremen to no end. Likely, her mother and brother's exalted positions within the tribe were the only things that stopped the Fremen from killing her on the spot. Tragically, the fears of the Bene Gesserit proved to be well-founded. By the end of the third book, Children of Dune, Alia's personality fragmented completely, and she was essentially quote-unquote possessed by the ancestral memory of her maternal grandfather, the Baron Harkonnen, who tried to use her to destroy House Atreides from beyond the grave. Alia was only able to stop him by committing suicide by throwing herself from a high window. And on that rather grisly note, I leave you. Next week, by far the freakiest faction in all of Dune, the Bene Tleilax. Until then. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and check out our website at studiobrainstorm.net. And if you have a story that you think is worth telling, we are more than happy to help you publish it. Thank you, and have a nice day.